It's been a few months, so it's time for an updated Series 4 and 5 tier list for Marvel Snap. We've got over 50 cards to get through, so let's go ahead and just dive on into it, shall we? We're going to kick things off with the flexible and powerful category. All of the cards found in this grouping appear in multiple top decks in Marvel Snap and tend to be kind of unique in their role, making them difficult to fully replace in any decks that want to utilize them. We'll kick things off with the most popular card in our breakdown today, Zabu, whether it's discounting powerful tech cards like Shang-Chi and Enchantress, or letting you slam bombs like Miss Marvel and Darkhawk at a discounted rate. This is definitely the most popular and potent card you could be picking up from Series 4 and 5 right now, if it's not currently in your collection. Speaking of Miss Marvel and Darkhawk, they are our next two cards in this flexible and powerful category. They are essentially always accompanied by Zabu, but they put massive amounts of stats into play and are irreplaceable in any deck looking to leverage their power. Our next flexible and powerful card hangs over the format like the fart cloud it uses to blow away your opponent's cards, and that is Alioth, just easily one of the best 6 energy cards in Marvel Snap generically. Alioth letting you deterministically win lanes when you have priority, especially in tandem with other cards like Shang-Chi that blow your opponent out when you don't have priority. Put your opponent into squeezes where they just can't win most games. It's obnoxious, it's powerful, it's definitely flexible. Annihilus is our next flexible and powerful card. Its on reveal effect when used in tandem with Hood as well as the Sentry's Void is a 3-card package that provides an invaluable amount of stats to a variety of different decks in the metagame that are performing well. Up next is Jeff the Baby Landshark, easily the most generically flexible and potent 2-energy card in Marvel Snap to date, whether it's wiggling you into a flooded zone that's otherwise been closed out, or letting you sneak into Professor X who thinks they have a lane on lock. Jeff the Baby Landshark does a lot while moving around the board and getting into wherever he pleases. Our next card is Marvel Snap's Queen of Flexible and my personal favorite card in the game, Nico Minaru. Her range of spells do everything from drawing us cards to make our deck more consistent, to removing problematic locations, mitigating variance, to even doubling up her own stats to allow her to provide power when that's what we're looking to be doing. Nico Minaru is truly a Swiss Army knife Marvel Snap card that is phenomenal inside of any deck that can pair her with cheap or low power cards that don't mind being sacrificed or turned into demons. Next up is Iron Lad, a card that provides an increase in consistency to decks that are looking for key cards, whether it's digging you an extra card deep for Hela or giving you another chance to find an Iron Man or duplicate your Darkhawk. Iron Lad really has a wide range of decks that are competitive that it slots into meaningfully. Our final card in the flexible and powerful category is a potent tech card that helps you keep up with a variety of powerful cards in the game, and that is Mobius M. Mobius. He shuts down everything from opposing Zabus and Sarahs to She-Hulks and Deaths, and he even goes so far as to make location variants swing in your favor, thanks to stopping locations like Icebox, Dream Dimension, and even making Elysium fully one-sided, giving you a huge leg up. As we move into the narrow and powerful category, these are cards that are only contained in really one specific good deck, but they are a headlining key feature of that deck and can't be replaced if you're looking to play it. Kick off this category with one of Marvel Snap's biggest bats in Galactus, able to blow away 2/3 of the board. Galactus headlines a clutter control deck that's been potent since Annihilus was added to the game last year. A lot of Galactus' strength in that particular archetype comes from the fact that in tandem with other powerful 6-drops like Alioth, your opponent has to play around a ton of different effects on the last turn of the game, which is often difficult to impossible, leaving them guessing and frequently guessing wrong. Our next narrow and powerful card is the Mad Titan himself, Thanos, headlining lockjaw variations that both love to slam big threats or lock your opponent out of the game with cards like Professor X and Alioth. Thanos decks have been around the top of the metagame consistently since this card was added to the game. Speaking of Thanos decks that love to slam big cards, our next 3 narrow and powerful cards largely headline Thanos lockjaw decks. Cull, Obsidian, Scar, as well as Blob are all cards that provide massive stat lines that Thanos loves to either play organically or flip out of Lockjaw at a discounted rate. It is noteworthy that Cull, Obsidian, and Scar do see some play in like some B- / C tier fringe decks in the format, but by and large, Thanos is their only competitive home. Up next, we have the Living Tribunal, who is simply not replaceable in any deck that features him. Typically, Living Tribunal decks are built around the idea that you're just going to dump a bunch of stats into play in no place in particular, and then he's going to chop it up and distribute it evenly across the board in a way that's difficult to keep up with. Living Tribunal builds really accelerate inside of formats where decks are just looking to put numbers into play, i.e. Hela, while struggling a bit against decks leaning heavily into tech cards, since something like Enchantress can wipe the text off of our key card. Overall, Living Tribunal has been potent in a number of Marvel Snap's metagames since it was added. I expect that to continue to be the case. While Loki isn't the omnipresent format dominating card he once was, he still fills a viable and important role in the decks that contain him, which continue to be competitive. Think of Loki as a tech card in the matchups where he's really strong. Things like Destroy or Annihilus, where you could use their tools against them, are really the places where Loki shines. Speaking of Destroy, our next two cards, X-23 and Null, are absolutely critical if you're looking to play that archetype at full power. The extra energy that X-23 provides really allows Destroy to play on curve more consistently, scaling up their threats like Deadpool or just blowing up enough cards to scale Null into a really scary threat. You can also use X-23 to play Null out ahead of time, so you can either take that Null and copy it with Taskmaster or double it across the board with a card like Arnim Zola. Finally, to close out our narrow and powerful category, we have the Black Knight, who is responsible in part for Hela's rise to prominence in the metagame, giving Destroy decks another consistent way to cheat a large stat line into play, and one that is completely immune to interaction like Shang-Chi and Shadow King at that is quite potent. Moving along to the fine power level of cards in my review, these are all things contained in lower tier decks in the format, or they're cards that just aren't mission critical enough to whatever they're played in that you couldn't easily swap them out for something else, making them a lower priority pickup for a lot of players. Kick off our flexible and fine category with an impressive stat line that Gladiator has at 3-8. While you can definitely get into a touch of trouble against decks like Lockjaw that have some bigger units, there's a lot of decks in the format where Gladiator is basically just going to kill anything that he pulls out of the deck. And if you're pairing Gladiator with Shang-Chi, you can generally clean up whatever mess Gladiator got himself into before the game ends. Beta Ray Bill, in tandem with Thor as well as Jane Foster, has created a new 3-card stat package that can slot into a variety of decks. While at base level, these cards provide a little bit less numbers on average than something like Miss Marvel or Darkhawk, they also scale a lot harder in tandem with things like Odin or locations like the Cloning Vats that can let you get extra leverage out of the way they add points to the board. Our next 3 cards in the flexible and fine category are Spider-Ham, Echo, and Supergiant. All 3 of those are what I refer to as tech cards, meaning they have potent effects into specific decks, meaning they can be excellent under the right metagame circumstances. Spider-Ham is phenomenal against decks that are leaning on one specific card to do a lot of their work, such as Living Tribunal or Hela. Echo is phenomenal against format staple Miss Marvel, and then just generically good against decks with lots of ongoing effects. And Supergiant is aces at disrupting people that are looking to have big plays on turn 5, such as Leech or Sarah or Professor X. Up next is Legion, a location variance mitigation tool, and also something that can completely blow your opponent out with things like Death's Domain or Bar with No Name. Legion doesn't really have established decks, but he frequently pops up in things like Loki or Sarah that are looking to leverage this kind of getcha style effect in the last turns of the game. Thinking of location variance mitigation, Snowguard is a premium 1 energy card that not only does this, but also provides fodder in our hand for things like Collector and Loki. Outside of that, because the Snowguard creations also cost 3 energy, so you see some amount of play inside of Silver Surfer shells as well. Our next flexible and fine card is Nebula, one of the premier ways to generate stats on a 1 energy card in Marvel Snap. Nebula not only threatens to grow large, having synergy with things like Storm that can lock out a location, but she also dictates the terms of engagement, making your opponent forced to play into locations that they might not want to, or give you an ever-increasing threat there. Up next, we have Mirage, who I think is the premier 2 energy generate a card in Marvel Snap right now. While she sees play in things like Loki, I think generically she's a very reasonable card. It is worth noting, however, that I don't know that she's so much better than something like Sentinel that she's necessarily worth your resource investment if you're someone with a more limited pool of tokens and spotlight keys. We close out the flexible and fine category with Silk, who's not only a good rate 5 power for just 2 energy, but she's also phenomenal at triggering move synergies, shining with cards like Kraven, as well as making Miles Morales consistently cost 1 over the course of the game. Moving along to our narrow and fine category, we have cards that headline just one specific type of deck, generally speaking, and that deck tends to not be a best deck in the format. That being said, if you really love the archetype these cards are contained in, they can make those decks more fun and more powerful, so they're worth considering picking up if they'll increase your enjoyment of the game. We'll kick off this category with a couple of my favorite cards in Kitty Pryde as well as Elsa Bloodstone. While these cards are down after a couple of nerfs, are definitely not fully out, headlining both Shuri decks as well as a Loki variation that I enjoy playing. I think these cards can still be fun and get you reasonable amounts of wins if you play them well. Our next narrow and fine category card is a downgrade from the last time I did one of these tier lists, and that is the High Evolutionary. While High Evo still has varying amounts of popularity depending on what the format looks like, the overall stats of the best High Evolutionary deck have been quite middling fairly consistently for the last couple of months. While I think this card is still playable if you really enjoy the play patterns of Magic into Big Hulks and Infinite, or if you absolutely love making your opponents get negative powers so you can slam down cheap Abomination, I don't think High Evolutionary is the format powerhouse that it once was anymore, and I don't think I'd recommend picking it up based on pure power level. Our next grouping of narrow and fine cards are all phenomenal inside of various discard decks that are B tier in the format. We have Meek, MODOK, Silver Samurai, Dakin, and our latest card release in Corvus Glaive. Meek and MODOK shine the most inside of the Collector Morbius Little discard style decks that love to scale up cheap threats as payoffs for discarding cards over the course of the game. Dakin and Silver Samurai are also often seen being played in tandem with one another, since Silver Samurai is a phenomenal way to not only power up your Dakin, but your Dakin's also a great way to break the symmetry that Silver Samurai has, discarding a card from each player's hand. Finally, Corvus Glaive sees play in some Sandman-style ramp shells that have middling stats and also gives you those higher variance Hela decks, but overall it is worth noting that the best performing Hela decks currently are still those Lockjaw variations that don't necessarily want to be playing Corvus. Up next, we have Kairia, who's definitely a role player inside of the Thanos Lockjaw deck, but she's also not so much meaningfully better than other effects like Armor and Cosmo that she's necessarily a high priority pickup. Celine primarily sees play in the Galactus Clutter deck, but she's definitely not mission critical there, and you can easily substitute her out for something else. Sebastian Shaw sees play with Silver Surfer, but it's been a while since that archetype was a force to be reckoned with, and you can definitely sub Sebastian Shaw out for more generically powerful cards like Gladiator and still play that deck to reasonable effect. Phoenix Force is a fantastically fun card that defines the archetype in which it's played, but that archetype has both consistency problems and frequently folds to potent tech cards that are commonly played in the metagame, so it's certainly not a top tier strategy. Hitmonkey is an incredibly fun card to build your deck around and spew your hand out on the final turn of the game, but in terms of competitiveness, I think it really struggles from the fact that the numbers that Hitmonkey puts into play aren't meaningfully better than just playing a card like Shang-Chi, breaking your opponent's board and requiring far less setup. Similar to Hitmonkey, Werewolf by Night's an incredibly fun way to generate a big number in Marvel Snap, and it does have a little bit more synergy with Shang-Chi. That being said, I think it struggles compared to some of the other ways to put metrics into play in the format that require a little bit less setup and deck building restriction. Ghost Spider is a key enabler inside of movement archetypes, so if you like playing decks with things like Vulture or Human Torch, she's definitely a must-have card. That being said, those decks have basically never been top tier in Marvel Snap, and there's not really anything coming up on the horizon that's likely to change that. Man-Thing got a little bit better again when Luke Cage went back to being global, since it's easier for you to break his symmetry. That being said, Man-Thing in an absolute best case scenario is only a 413, and that best case scenario just isn't coming up super frequently in Marvel Snap anymore, since smaller decks that play lots of little things to a single lane often have a hard time keeping up with our more recent metagames. While Ravonna Renslayer isn't as generically a powerful cost reducer as some others, she does see play in fringe decks like Mr. Negative and is a headlining part of the Galactus Clutter deck, which is pretty potent. Grandmaster is a kind of unique enabler that sees play in decks looking to leverage Darkhawk and Ronin most frequently. That being said, its effect's not terribly powerful, and if you substitute it for something else anywhere it's being played, that deck is likely still fine. We'll wrap up the narrow and fine category with a card that's kind of borderline with the kind of bad grouping, and that is Nimrod. While Nimrod struggled to see play in any relevant decks most recently, somewhere in my heart of hearts and in my brain, I have to think there's a Shuri Nimrod deck that must be good into all of the Shang-Chi that's been running around, right? Finally, we're going to close out some quick hits on the kind of bad category, which currently features Howard the Duck, Jean Grey, Kang the Conqueror, Havoc, Hercules, Lady Deathstrike, Master Mold, and Martyr. Howard's effect just doesn't quite do enough compared to what other playable 1/2s do in Marvel Snap. Jean Grey's a card who, this is her first time I'm putting her in the kind of bad category, but I keep saying she's a maybe reasonable card waiting for a format for her to be good in, and she's been out long enough that we just haven't had one of those formats so far, which kind of leads me to believe she's probably just kind of bad. Kang the Conqueror is not only a time-wasting card, but also just doesn't provide meaningful information that good Marvel Snap players couldn't infer a lot of the time. Anyways, remember, your opponents are 75% to have whatever their bomb is on the last turn of the game anyways, so if you're an experienced gamer, Kang's not really giving you information that you didn't already have most of the time. Havoc is probably my personally favorite card in the kind of bad category, and I've spent a lot of time trying to make him work, but the numbers don't lie. His metrics are just atrocious, and even the best Havoc decks that I personally have played definitely struggle to be truly competitive. Hercules is a card that just doesn't fit into the curve that movement decks are looking to execute. By the time you slam a 4 energy card down, you've typically spent your movement cards or you're holding them to play after the fact, which then you don't have enough time to fully leverage the effects that they have. Lady Deathstrike had like this very brief window of being somewhat reasonable when Elsa was dominating the format, and you could ramp into her to clear that card out before it took off. But since they changed those cards and go wide decks in general just really haven't been relevant in the metagame, the Lady's Deathstrike effect has not been relevant either. Master Mold is probably the worst card that I get asked with some frequency to play. Filling your opponent's hand up with Sentinels isn't that detrimental under most conditions, and Ronin is just a much more difficult card to maximize than Devil Dinosaur, who also isn't particularly playable. Finally, Martyr struggles for the same reason a few of the cards I've mentioned today struggle, and that she's really only good at a deck that can go wide and fill up the entire board, and those decks just really haven't been relevant in Marvel Snap in some months now. Don't actually know how long this is until I get the whole video back from the editor, but hopefully it was concise enough that I was able to articulate my thoughts to you on why I feel cards are where I rank them, while also not making it so long that it was unmanageable to get through while reading over 50 cards. I'd really appreciate some engagement on this video if you enjoyed it. These tier list videos are a lot more work to put together than a lot of the stuff that we do on the channel. I'd love to continue doing them periodically, but we got to have metrics available to match that. As always, if you have any feedback on this, or there's anything you'd like to see added or changed in the future, I'd love to hear that in a comment down below. Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and hopefully we'll see you back again soon for some more Snap content here on YouTube.